We finally got some reveals on this week's Watchmen, but also a lot more questions. A hero from the original comic returns, one villain's revealed, and another one is kind of teased. I'm going to break down all of these Easter eggs, references, and plot hints here on Screen Crush. This episode follows Laurie, aka Silk Spectre 2, from the original Watchmen comic. She's played by Jean Smart, who was born just 1 year after Laurie was in the comics. So at 69 years old, she's maybe a little too old to be an active FBI agent, but she's still a badass. The title of the episode is She Was Killed by Space Junk. This is from the song Space Junk by the new wave band Devo. The song is about pieces of satellites falling all over the world, but most tragically on my baby's head. This song connects to the comics in a few different ways. First, Laurie Blake, who's a former superhero and an FBI agent on the show, is a big Devo fan.
Hey, Devo.
In the comics, when Dan puts on his night owl goggles, he tells her that he must look pretty Devo. The song also mentions a woman named Sally, which is the name of Laurie's mother, the first Silk Spectre. But the song has another, more cryptic connection to Laurie's Joke that I'll get into in a little bit. The last time we saw Laurie in the comics, she was on the run with Dan Drieberg, formerly Night Owl. HBO's website features extra material that's been gathered by Special Agent Dale Peaty, who we also meet in this episode. Now, one of these files details how Laurie and Dan were captured in the 90s. He was locked up, but she made a deal to become an FBI agent who specializes in catching vigilantes. Now, it makes sense to me that she would turn on her fellow vigilantes because Laurie never really liked being a superhero. It was just something she did because it made her mom happy. She's like a pageant mom, but for dressing up in tights and fighting crime. There's a reference to Dan Drieberg in this episode when Joe Keane mentions getting her other owl out of a cage. This means Dan. Now, we don't know exactly why he's still in jail, but the PDpedia mentions that he refuses to give any details about Rorschach or how he died. So odds are he refused to turn on his fellow vigilantes. Laurie's father was the late hero Edward Blake, aka the comedian. She's taken her father's last name and fully embraced him. Now, this is kind of a big deal for comic readers because in The Watchmen, she hated Edward Blake and was shocked to find out that he was her real dad. She's also developed her father's cynical outlook on the world. She's telling jokes and thinks that wearing a mask is childish.
He's not a hero. He's a joke.
The theme of Laurie seeing the world as a joke is hinted at in this bus advertisement, which features her father. She communicates with John using a phone booth called the True Satellite Orbital Relay. These are operated by a private company owned by a woman named Lady True. She bought Adrian Veidt's company after he disappeared in 2007. So think about the implications of these phone booths. These aren't some top secret government facilities. These are for the public to use. This booth is even covered in graffiti. Now, this shows that people still miss Dr. Manhattan and they want him to return.
The assholes down here still think you give a shit.
These are almost like prayer booths where people can go tell God what's on their minds. Also, the rotating hydrogen atom on top is a 3D likeness of Dr. Manhattan's symbol. I also like that the booths are a Manhattan shade of blue, just like the Magna Block box from episode 2 and the Manhattan branded electric ear cleaner that Laurie has in a suitcase.
Mommy, what was that?
That was an electric ear cleaner.
It was kind of big.
It sure was.
Speaking of that ear cleaner, notice it's a piece of branded erotica that features her in Manhattan on an Esquire cover. This cover is about her stealing John from his longtime girlfriend, Janie Slater. And this branded erotica is also similar to the 1940s era dirty comics that featured her mother, the first Silk Spectre. The opening scene when she arrests Mr. Shadow is meant to mimic the opening of The Dark Knight. The hero even puts on a Christian Bale voice.
Release the hostage. It's over.
You either die a hero, or you live long enough.
And to twist the satire knife even further, Keane says,
On behalf of the American taxpayer, thank you for keeping our streets safe from rich assholes playing dress up.
The bank is the National Bank Company. This is the bank that Dollar Bill was a spokesman for. We even saw a vintage ad for this company in the first episode. The newspaper says Grisham is retiring from the Supreme Court. This is referencing lawyer and novelist John Grisham, who's known for legal thrillers like The Firm and The Pelican Brief. The Pelican Brief, by the way, centers on the assassination of Supreme Court justices. In her home, we meet her pet owl, Who. This is probably a reference to the Abbott and Costello bit, Who's on First, and it's an example of the wry sense of humor that she's inherited from her father.
Well, then who's playing first?
Yes.
I mean, the fellow's name on first base.
Who?
The fellow playing first base for St. Louis. Who?
Also notice this Andy Warhol-style artwork of a younger Laurie and other superheroes from her era. Warhol never appeared in the comic, but he is showing off similar artwork in the opening montage of the Watchmen movie. Also, the portrait is divided into equal-sized panels, much like the structure of the Watchmen comic book. Also, check out this shot, framed to look like Laurie is wearing a mask. We get a little bit of in-world backstory about the Redfordations in this episode and in the new PDpedia entries. Redfordations is the derogatory nickname for the money paid out to survivors of racist attacks and their descendants. In this episode, we find out that a lot of people moved to Tulsa after this law was passed, making the city kind of a boomtown. This would explain the presence of the Millennium Clock, which True Industries built in Tulsa. Now, we don't know much about this building yet, except that when True dedicated it, she quoted the Percy Shelley poem that serves as a hard diss to Pharaoh Ozymandias.
My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains.
The name Millennium is important too. This is the line of products that Veidt launched after the squid monster attack. Now, the ad campaign was centered around optimism, but proved to be a massive failure because people weren't feeling all that optimistic after a squid monster attacked them. This also showed that Veidt wasn't fully in control of people and couldn't predict how they would react to the world events. But True is going to appear in the next episode, and she seems like an important character. She's most likely the mystery person that this woman was buying newspapers for in episode 2. I'm wondering if she's actually being controlled by Adrian Veidt in some way. If you think that's a possibility, let me know in the comments. The FBI briefing shows an excerpt from Rorschach's journal, specifically from this page of the comic book. Now, there's actually a shocking reveal hidden here. The public is aware of Rorschach's journal. It was even published by the alt-right newspaper, The New Frontiersman. PD even has a copy of the journal by his bed. Now remember, this journal says that the squid monster attack was a fake, and the reason for ending the Cold War is all a lie. But most people choose not to believe it. And apparently, the FBI believes it's real.
What the hell is this?
Oh, it's an excerpt from Rorschach's journal.
Which means that the entire government knows that it's real, which means that the Russian and American governments have been dropping baby squids on people to keep them afraid of space monsters. So it's only a matter of time before this comes out, right? Or maybe people just aren't interested in the truth. I mean, if news disagrees with some people's worldview, they're more likely to call it fake instead of confronting change. Anyways, yellow keeps sneaking into the color scheme of the show, just like in the comic book. Notice the yellow butts on the rifles and Looking Glass's yellow hanky. Also, next to the journal, notice the tiny detail that his wristwatch is nearing midnight, a visual theme that is repeated literally and figuratively throughout the original comic. Laurie is staying at the Black Freighter Inn and Suites. Now, this is an Easter egg that works on a couple levels. Watchmen readers will remember the comic within a comic, Tales from the Black Freighter. That story is about a sailor whose ship is destroyed by a pirate ship called the Black Freighter. The sailor makes a raft out of his dead shipmates to sail home and warn his town about the pirates. But when he gets there, he thinks pirates have already landed and he goes on a murder spree, accidentally killing his friends and family. Then he realizes that the Black Freighter isn't coming for his town, it's coming for him. The story is a metaphor for Adrian Veidt, killing 3 million people to save the world. At the end of the comic, Veidt talks about dreaming of swimming toward a ship, just like the sailor in the comic. In this episode, he even rides past a pirate flag, cementing the idea that he's doomed to live on a metaphorical black freighter. But in a larger sense, it's a cautionary tale about crossing moral lines to achieve a greater good. So, as a society, when we cross too many of these moral lines in the name of justice, we essentially become damned and all live on a metaphorical black freighter. This is exactly where the characters on the TV show Watchmen are headed. Police brutality, torture, and who knows what's next. So Laurie living in this hotel symbolizes that she's going to face some tough moral choices in Tulsa. Moving on, Judd is buried in the horribly named Tartarus Acres. In Greek mythology, this was the name of hell. There's an angel statue in the cemetery that looks an awful lot like this angel statue from the funeral in the second issue of Watchmen. The song that Angela sings at the funeral is The Last Roundup, made popular by Gene Autry. It's basically a dying cowboy singing about going to heaven.
I'm heading for the last roundup.
Now, it's interesting that Judd chose this song for his funeral because one of the last lyrics says, Custer will be waiting in heaven. Remember, the 7th Cavalry Terrorists named themselves after Custer's cavalry regiment. So, since Judd is a secret racist, it's interesting he slipped in this reference into his funeral eulogy. Now, also, it's a little suspicious that the terrorists want to take Joe Keene alive. The PDpedia also includes a letter written by Joe's father, John, another senator, to Judd's father. In the letter, he's entrusting him with the painting Martial Feats of Comanche Horsemanship that we saw in episode 2. He says that it's a totem of responsibility that he has within their order. The painting is then passed on to whoever assumes this responsibility, and now that appears to be Judd. And just to prove the letter is actually about clan membership, it's signed AKIA, or a Klansman I Am. So this dude is definitely a bad guy, and the kidnapping was probably orchestrated to make him look good in some way. I mean, maybe? Let me know if you think he's behind the 7th Cavalry down in the comments. The funeral fades from Laurie's face to a bust of Alexander the Great wearing Veidt's purple mask. There's a couple references just in this one transition. One, that Laurie used to be a superhero, and two, Veidt's hero is Alexander the Great. He even said that the King of Macedonia was the only human he felt an affinity for. Veidt is listening to the song Israelite. In one of the original Watchmen appendices, he expressed an interest in reggae fusion. Now, this is a great acknowledgement of a small detail from the comics. The song he's listening to is by Desmond Decker and the Aces. It's basically about a man who's put upon by society who's struggling to escape his situation, kind of like Adrian Veidt in this episode. And there's another Easter egg hidden within the song. Decker's record label was called Pyramid. Adrian has always had an affinity for pyramids, given that his superhero namesake was a pharaoh. He even owned a company called Pyramid Deliveries. Also, he meditates on a table similar to his last scene in Watchmen, and when he sits on the table, it kind of looks like he's floating, like when Dr. Manhattan meditates on Mars. His robe is yellow and purple, just like his superhero costume, which we see in this episode as well. He also references
some sort of Republic serial villain,
which is repeating a line from Book 11 of The Watchmen. He also says,
all best wishes and encouragement,
which is a line from the Veidt Method, a self-help program that he started in the 1980s. So Veidt is building something, a diving suit or a submarine, something that involves marine life, judging by this painting. I'm guessing this is so he can escape the island underwater using only the primitive technology that he has inside the castle. Now, more importantly, we learned that he's held captive on the island by a mask named the Game Warden. Or is he? In the Game Warden's letter, he says that Veidt arrived and they agreed upon terms of his captivity. So let me throw something out here. What if the Game Warden is another clone created by Veidt, specifically to keep him on the island? Veidt might have decided that he deserved to be punished for killing 3 million people, so he built a prison for himself. Then he created a prison guard to keep him in place should he change his mind. And the Game Warden's letter arrives with a wax pirate seal to really hit home that Veidt lives on the metaphorical Black Freighter. The scene ends with another fade, this time to Joe Keane. The show loves to use its fades to show links between certain characters. Hooded Justice faded into Angela in episode 2 because the hero is most likely her grandfather. So fading from the villain Adrian Veidt to the maybe villain Joe Keane could be a huge clue. At the Senator's press conference, one of the reporters mentions that Russia is building an intrinsic field generator. This is the same machine that caused Dr. Manhattan to have superpowers. This also suggests that maybe these countries aren't as at peace as they seem, and the Cold War could start back up. Laurie references the murder of her dad in a secret closet compartment, and Night Owl's goggles once again make an appearance. Now finally, I want to talk about Laurie's joke and why it's important that it frames the whole episode. First, obviously, she's the daughter of the comedian and she's telling a joke. But more importantly, her dad chose the identity of the comedian because the only way he can make sense of human suffering was to laugh at it and treat it like a joke. Laurie now has that same cynicism, if not her father's nihilism. Everyone in the joke is a stand-in for a Watchmen character. The bricklayer is the comedian, her father. She says,
he's really good at it. He's a real master of his craft.
Just as the comedian was a master assassin and murderer. The little girl was Laurie, his daughter.
And he shows the daughter how to do everything, step by step.
Her stumbling over the first joke is a classic comedy misdirect to catch you off guard so you don't see the punchline coming. Laurie uses misdirect throughout the episode, like at the bank robbery, which plays out like a practical joke on Mr. Shadow, and when she doesn't hand in her second handgun at the funeral. The bricklayer is building a barbecue, which is an appropriate metaphor for the comedian since he liked to set people on fire with a flamethrower. But the bricklayer isn't quite as good at his craft as he thought, just like the comedian was ultimately assassinated in his own home. The brick the little girl throws in the air could represent a couple things. One, it shows her ability to misdirect. The brick could also represent her ex-boyfriend, Dr. Manhattan. At the end of Watchmen, he leaves for Mars and Laurie says she doesn't want to go with him. She wants to give humanity a chance. His return could upend the way people exist and think about the world, like if someone were to say, kill God with a brick. In the joke, he says,
a live body and a dead body have the same number of particles, so it doesn't matter.
Which is something that John tells Laura in the comic. He also says that he's already in hell because Dr. Manhattan sees all of time as happening at once. The episode ends with Laurie almost being killed by Angela's car, like how Sally was hit with space junk in the Devo song. Now she might assume that Dr. Manhattan dropped the car here as a sign that he liked her joke. but it's more likely that Will Reeves had the airship drop the car as a way of drawing Angela and Laurie together. And when she finishes the joke, she says,
Good joke.
just like Rorschach did in the comic. And finally, every episode of Watchmen, like the comic, has an ending that mirrors its beginning. This episode begins with Laurie sending a message into space, and ends with a message falling from the sky. Well guys, that's all the Easter eggs and things that I found, but please, if you found any more, let me know in the comments below. And if you're here for the first time, please subscribe. For Screen Crush, I'm Ryan Airy.